There is a woman I want to tell you about. Her name is Diane. She is 64 years old, and she said something to me last year that I have not been able to stop thinking about. She said, I did not stay because I was weak. I stayed because I genuinely believed that if I loved him well enough and long enough and carefully enough, he would eventually become the man I could already see he was capable of being. She stayed for 12 years. He did not change. I want to talk about this today, not to judge Diane, not to judge anyone who has been in something similar, because I have spoken to enough women over enough years to know that this is one of the most common experiences women carry, quietly, without quite naming it. The belief that love, applied with enough patience, is a force that can transform another person. I want to tell you 3 things. Why the hope made sense, what you were actually doing while you waited, and what the moment of clarity actually looks like, because it almost never looks the way you expect. The first thing, why the hope made sense. I want to start here because I think it matters. The hope was not foolish. The hope was not a sign of weakness or low self-worth or poor judgment. The hope came from something real, because the man you were hoping he would become, he showed you glimpses of that man. That is the part that does not get talked about enough. There were moments where he was exactly who you needed him to be, moments of real warmth, real effort, real connection. A particular evening where he listened in a way he almost never listened. A moment of tenderness that surprised you. An afternoon where the 2 of you were easy together in a way that made you remember why you had chosen him in the first place. And when those moments came, they confirmed what you already believed, that the person you fell in love with was in there, that the difficult behavior was not who he actually was, but a layer over who he actually was. That if you could just help him through the layer, or wait for him to work through it himself, the real version of him would emerge and stay. Diane told me that what kept her was not the bad times. The bad times were hard, but she could manage the bad times. What kept her was the good times. The moments where he was funny and warm and present and exactly right. She said, I kept thinking, that is him, the real him. And I kept waiting for the real him to stay. That hope is not stupidity. That hope is love doing what love does, looking for the best version of the person and believing in it. The problem is not the hope itself. The problem is what happens when hope becomes the entire strategy. When you stop asking whether this strategy is working and simply keep applying it, because the alternative is a question you are not ready to answer. There is also something else worth naming here. Many of us were taught, one way or another, that love is supposed to look like this. That love is supposed to be patient and steadfast and persistent. That a woman who loves a difficult man and stays is doing something admirable. That leaving is giving up. That staying is the proof of something real. That teaching is worth examining, because patience is a virtue in the right circumstances. But patience applied indefinitely to someone who is not changing is not patience. It is something else. And it costs you something you do not always notice until you count the years. The second thing, what you were actually doing while you waited, because while you were hoping, you were also working. And I want to name the work because it tends to be invisible even to the person doing it. You were managing his moods, his reactions, his needs. You were adjusting yourself constantly, what you said, how you said it, when you raised something, and when you let it go. You were tracking his state in a way that had become so automatic you did not even notice you were doing it. walking into a room and reading it before you spoke, deciding in the first 10 seconds whether this was a good moment or a bad moment and calibrating everything accordingly. You are carrying the emotional weight of two people and calling it a relationship. Diane described it this way. She said, I became very good at knowing what he needed before he knew it himself. I thought that was love. She said, it took me a long time to understand that it was management, that I had become his manager, and that the job never ended. This matters because the work is exhausting in a way that is hard to explain to people who have not done it. It is not the dramatic exhaustion of obvious conflict. It is the quiet, grinding exhaustion of permanent vigilance, of never quite being able to relax, of always having part of your attention on him, on where he is emotionally, on what is coming, on what needs to be smoothed over before it becomes something bigger. What it also does over time is shrink you, not suddenly, gradually. You stop bringing certain things up because you know how he will react. You stop spending time with certain friends because he makes it difficult. You stop pursuing things that matter to you because the bandwidth it takes to manage him has left very little bandwidth for anything else. And you adjust to the smaller version of your life so slowly that you barely notice it happening. And underneath all of that work, underneath the managing and the adjusting and the hoping, there is a question you are not quite letting yourself ask. Because if you ask it, you might have to answer it. The third thing, what the moment of clarity actually looks like. People talk about the moment they knew as though it is a thunderbolt, a single dramatic revelation, and sometimes it is. But for most of the women I have spoken to, it is something much quieter than that. For Diane, it was a Tuesday evening. Nothing dramatic had happened. He had said something slightly unkind, the kind of thing he had said hundreds of times before. And she had done what she always did, absorbed it, said nothing, waited for it to pass. And then she went into the kitchen and she stood at the sink and she thought, I am tired in a way that sleep does not fix. And she understood in that moment that she had been tired like this for years. Not from the relationship being hard, from the relationship never changing, from doing the same work, making the same adjustments, having the same hope, and arriving at the same place over and over and over again. She said, I did not leave because he was cruel. He was not cruel. I left because I finally understood that what I was waiting for was never going to arrive. Not because he was a bad person, but because he was who he was. And who he was did not want to change. That is a different kind of ending to accept. Not that the relationship was terrible, but that the version of it you were waiting for was never going to exist. I want to say something about where this leaves you, because I think the most painful part of this kind of ending, when you finally stop waiting, is not the loss of him. It is the reckoning with the years. The calculation your mind does, the what if I had understood this sooner? I want to say something about that directly. Those years were not wasted, not because something good came from them necessarily, though sometimes something does, but because the version of you that walked into that relationship could not have known what the version of you who walked out of it knows. Understanding comes from the inside of something, not from the outside. You could not have seen it clearly until you had lived in it long enough to see it clearly. And the capacity you built, the ability to manage, to read a room, to hold difficult things without collapsing, that is yours now. It does not belong to him. You earned it, and you keep it. What changes when you finally stop is where you spend it. You stop spending it on someone who has decided not to grow, and you start spending it on your own life, your own friendships, your own quiet Tuesday evenings that belong entirely to you. That is not a small thing. That is, in the end, everything. My name is Patricia Hayes. This is Patricia's Porch, where I believe the most honest conversations are the most useful ones. If this reached you today, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe below. I am here every week, and I would love to keep this conversation going with you. Thank you for sitting with me. I will see you next time.